Welcome to ReadingBear. Today, we've got a story where OP follows an entitled boss's genius plan to the letter, and the fallout gets very, very expensive. I worked in operations for a mid-sized company that sold hardware with a service contract attached. Not exciting gear. The kind of stuff that sits in a closet or a server room and only gets attention when it breaks. I was the person between procurement, logistics, finance, and the client side, which is a fancy way of saying I kept an eye on inventory, made sure vendors got paid on time, and watched the contract fine print so we didn't trip on it. I liked the job because it was predictable. If you scheduled things, kept clean records, and didn't make cute shortcuts, you could avoid disasters. Then my boss got promoted. He started as head of sales, and he was good at that big grin, loud confidence, zero patience. He told stories about crushing numbers and moving fast. That energy can be fun in sales, but it doesn't work in operations where there are contracts, lead times, and a lot of boring checks that exist because people before you learned expensive lessons. He didn't care about that. He wanted things to look good. That was his phrase. Make it look good. I learned quickly that make it look good meant I don't want to hear bad news, and if a number makes me unhappy, change the number. The storm that set up the malicious compliance started with cash flow. He stared at a dashboard, decided we were paying too fast, and wanted to optimize working capital. I translate that to delay paying vendors so the cash balance looks fatter. That's sometimes normal if you renegotiate terms, but he didn't want to renegotiate. He wanted to unilaterally push payments out without changing contracts. We had a handful of main vendors. One of them supplied a set of modules that went inside our gear. Without those modules, we couldn't ship finished units. The vendor was reliable, not cheap, and had contract teeth because we leaned on them a lot. In exchange for decent pricing and guaranteed response times, we agreed to early pay discounts and very clear stop ship rights if we missed payments past a short grace period. That part existed for a reason. They had been burned before. I knew that because I handled the onboarding. My boss looked at the payment run one morning and said, "Why are we paying these guys so fast?" "Because we take the discount," I said. 2% if we pay within the early window. It saves a lot over a quarter. He waved at the number. "Not this month. Hold everything not legally required. If they want their money, they can ask." "They'll ask," I said. "They'll also stop shipping. We can't build finished units without those modules. And we have service level agreements with penalties if we miss installs for our largest client." "Don't be dramatic," he said. "We'll be fine. Hold it." I asked for that in writing. I always do when something smells wrong. He rolled his eyes, typed 2 lines in an email, and included finance. "Hold all payments to vendor for 30 days minimum. Do not release funds without my approval. I'll handle escalations." He even added, "Do not negotiate separate terms. We standardize." "Oh," I replied. Received. Attached the vendor contract page that mentioned stop ship after dunning, and highlighted the clause about liquidated damages we'd owe our client if we couldn't deploy units because of our own supply issues. I wrote, "This action may result in stop ship from vendor and trigger client penalties. Please confirm." He replied back, one word, "Confirmed." So I followed his order to the letter. I put a hold on the vendor and the payment system. I removed them from the early pay queue. I sent AP a note to block any automatic releases. I told my team to stop partial, off-cycle workarounds we usually did to smooth things out. Normally, if a vendor poked us about timing, we'd release at least one invoice to keep things friendly. Not this time. The boss's words were, "Hold all payments for 30 days, minimum. Do not release funds without my approval." So we didn't. The vendor sent a polite reminder after a few days. I forwarded it to my boss. No response. They sent a stronger reminder. I forwarded that too and added, "Per contract, they can stop shipping after dunning. We have open POs pending and builds scheduled." He didn't answer. The vendor finally sent a formal dunning email that literally said, "Notice of intent to stop ship." I forwarded it with the subject, "Vendor issuing stop ship per clause." He replied, "Seen. Do not engage. I'll call them." That was his move. I'll call them. He loved calls because there was no paper trail. That works if you're actually smoothing things out. It doesn't work if the other side also has a legal department and a warehouse full of parts it can sell to your competitor. I didn't call. I obeyed. I did not engage. I kept my records neat. Logistics pinged me about a week later. "We're missing the modules for the West Region build. What's going on?" "Vendor is in stop ship," I said. "Payments are on hold per boss. "You're kidding," they said. "We have installed dates on the books. We've booked crews. The client's team is on the calendar." "I know," I said. "I flagged it to the boss. He said he would handle. It will be my guys standing in a closet with nothing to install," the logistics manager said. "You know that, right?" "I know." Another week passed. The vendor sent a formal stop-ship notice on letterhead. I forwarded again and added the client schedule. I put everything in one neat timeline: invoices, emails, dunning, our open POs, and the clause about their rights. I also included our client agreement section with the penalty table. It was the kind of email where anyone reading it couldn't say they weren't told. I got a short answer from my boss. "Understood. Do not pay $1 until I say so." So I didn't. The first install day came for our biggest client. The crew showed up, the client's team unlocked the room, and logistics opened crates and found nothing we could use. The modules were missing.
"We had chassis, cables, brackets, but not the heart of the units."
The client was confused and then annoyed. We rescheduled once. The vendor still didn't ship. We rescheduled again and offered to split the install, put in what we had, then return for the final step. The client's contract didn't allow that. It was a whole unit acceptance. That clause existed because they didn't want half-built systems sitting around their site. I kept forwarding updates. Day 1 missed. Penalty clock may start. Day 2 missed. Client wants assurance. My boss wrote back, "I'll handle. Do not pay." That was the only instruction I had to follow, so I kept following it. The vendor finally sent a final note. It said they would resume shipments after we cured the outstanding invoices and reset terms properly. They provided a minimal path, paid 2 specific invoices now, confirm a schedule for the rest, and they would release the first 2 pallets. I forwarded it. My boss said, "They blinked. Hold." They didn't blink. They were offering a bridge. I knew that. Anyone in operations knows that. They don't want to kill the account if they can get you back on the line. We could have reopened the pipeline with 2 payments and saved the install schedule. But the order was, do not pay $1. He wanted to force a concession we weren't going to get. He told sales to charm the client. Sales invited the client to lunch. They did not budge. The person on the client side, who actually lived in the penalty table, didn't care about lunch. They cared about their rollouts. They sent us a formal notice referencing their SLA with the daily penalty for missed install dates attributable to us. I attached it to the email thread and highlighted the number. I didn't add commentary. It was loud enough. In the middle of all this, I kept doing small things that were technically within the order and would keep the paper clean. I updated the risk spreadsheet daily and filed it in the shared drive. I logged every time I flagged something to my boss. I kept AP notes tidy. Held per directive, no exception. I did not take any unapproved action to soften the blow. That sounds cold, but that's malicious compliance. If I did any of the normal patchwork things, I'd be breaking the order that he was so proud of giving. Week 3 hit. We had 3 missed install windows. The stop ship turned into a wider freeze. The vendor canceled 2 pending pallets because our credit hold extended to the whole account. Our factory had workers standing around because the line was out of key parts. That was not cheap. Logistics had to reroute crews. Travel changes piled up. The client sent a second formal notice with a running tally of penalties. That tally had commas, the bad kind. I asked my boss again, in writing, whether I should release a partial payment to cure the hold and salvage the schedule. I attached the vendor's bridge offer again, and the client's updated penalty. He replied, "No, we will not be strong, armed. Do not release funds." I sent a calm, "Understood." I want to be clear about something. It would have been easy to go rogue. I had authority in the system to push through a small ACH. I had relationships at the vendor and could have bought a week by promising a plan. I also could have told the client more than, "We're working on it." And maybe they would have allowed a split install if I crafted it right. I did none of that because the order was explicit. I had it in writing, and I had already waved all the red flags. If I played hero and something else went sideways, that same boss would have happily thrown me under the bus for not following process. The day the number got real was a meeting with finance and legal. My boss demanded it because, in his words, people are being negative. He wanted to get alignment. Finance walked through the cash balance he liked to brag about and then showed the other side. Lost early pay discounts, cost of pushing out other vendors who started asking questions, and the freight we were going to pay to expedite once we finally did release funds. Legal showed the client contract, the penalty accrual, and the clause about termination for cause if we missed a certain threshold of install days. I showed the vendor contract page again and my timeline of notices and emails. My boss puffed and said the vendor was being hostile. Legal asked if we had violated the payment terms. He said, "We exercised our right to manage cash." Legal asked me what the contract said. I read the sentence. It said missing payments past a short grace period gave the vendor the right to stop shipments. It was simple and not unusual. Legal asked if we missed payments. I said yes, and referenced the held invoices by number. "Per directive?" the general counsel asked. "Yes," I said, and I projected the email where my boss wrote, "Hold all payments to vendor for 30 days minimum. Do not release funds without my approval. Do not negotiate separate terms. We standardize." I had highlighted it in yellow. Finance asked the vendor question everyone hates. "What's the current exposure if we pay today and expedite everything?" I had that number ready because I do my job. I had 3 scenarios: pay 2 invoices and get partials out, pay everything due and restart the pipeline, or sit still and take the penalties. The expedited scenario was ugly, but not fatal. The sit-still one was worse because the client penalties would blow past the savings. I kept the tone even while I went through it. When you present numbers that hurt, people shoot the messenger if you sound too smug or too scared. I stuck to facts. There was a short silence. The kind in a meeting where everyone knows what needs to happen, but someone's ego is in the way. Then my boss did the thing I knew he would do. He said, "We got here because operations didn't keep the vendor warm. If they had done their job, the vendor wouldn't have pulled the trigger so fast." I almost laughed because I had 4 years of keeping the vendor warm emails in neat folders and a literal PDF I send every quarter that thanks them for their support. But I kept my face still. Legal tapped the screen where my boss's "Do Not Engage" note sat right above the vendor's bridge offer. Finance scrolled to the client penalties. Logistics added travel change fees. The line on the slide that totaled things slid up and stopped at a number that made my stomach feel cold even though I had expected it. It was 7 figures, and not a small one. The general counsel said, "We have to cure the vendor hold today, and we have to call the client with a plan and service credits." He looked at my boss. "Do we have your approval to release the holds?" My boss did not want to say yes because his whole thing was hold the line. He tried to drag it out by saying, "We should get better terms first." The vendor's account manager replied to an email during the meeting, and I read it out loud. It said, in polite words, that we could negotiate later, but the release of shipments required payment according to the current agreement. That agreement was not changing by the afternoon. I asked, "Do I have approval to release the funds per the cure plan and to engage the vendor?" He had backed me into asking for exact words. That was on purpose. If he said yes, I would click the buttons. If he said no, the people in the room would watch the penalty clock keep going. He tried to save face. "Fine. Pay 2 invoices, get some pallets out, and I'll revisit the rest." "Per vendor," I said. "That will get 2 pallets out, but our install schedule needs 6 pallets over the next 2 weeks. If we don't pay the full amount due, the stop ship resumes after partial release, and we'll be right back here next week with travel costs and penalties again." Legal asked finance for the full due amount. Finance gave it. The general counsel said, "Release the funds in full today." He looked at me. "Do it." I did it. I went back to my desk, removed the holds, and released the payment run. I sent the vendor proof of payment and asked for shipments under our original schedule, reordered by urgency. They replied within an hour with pickup confirmations. Our warehouse set up receiving docks and prep teams. Logistics rebooked crews. The bleeding slowed, but the damage was done. We would still miss a couple of install days because freight is not magic, and you can't put a crate on a teleport pad no matter how loud your boss is. When the dust settled a couple of weeks later, finance sent a summary everyone could see. The lost early pay discounts alone were a noticeable number. The expediting cost was painful. The idle factory time was bad. The travel rebooks were smaller, but annoying. The client penalties were the biggest piece. We negotiated some of them down with service credits, basically a haircut, not a full shave, but it still rang the bell. The total slid over to 1.8 million and change. I've tried to forget the exact cents, but the headline number burned into my brain. There was an all hands a little after that. My boss didn't speak at it. The COO did. He talked calmly about process discipline and respecting the expertise of people who do the work. He didn't say my boss's name, but he didn't have to. A memo came later that said the sales organization would report differently, and the operations group would have final say on vendor terms and payments within contract. That memo also said someone was leaving to pursue opportunities. It was my boss. People asked me if it felt good. I didn't cheer. I don't like watching anyone lose a job, even if they earned it. But I won't lie, there was a sense of relief like taking off tight shoes. The next week, the outlook felt normal again. We paid vendors when we said we would. We took the early pay discounts. We shipped things when they were scheduled. We called the client and told them the plan and then did the plan. And when sales had a big idea that touched operations, they asked first. The part that made this malicious compliance and not just a work train wreck is that I did exactly what I was told, and I did it with a paper trail. I didn't invent a clever loophole. I didn't sabotage anything. I followed the order, highlighted the dangers, and let the person who gave the order own the outcome. He wanted to hold payments and standardize and look good. I held the payments. I didn't negotiate new terms. And I kept the books so neat that when the bill arrived, it had his fingerprints pressed in the wax seal. There were small moments around the edges that stick with me. The vendor's account manager called me after we paid and said, "We like you. Please don't do that again." I told them I agreed and that I tried to stop it, and they laughed a little like, "We knew." The logistics manager sent me a gif of a train finally rolling. The client sent a short note that said, "Appreciate the recovery and the honesty." That one mattered because they had every right to be angrier than they were. A few things changed for me personally. The COO called me into a room with legal and finance and asked me to help write a policy. It was simple. If a directive contradicts a contract term, you cannot follow it without written approval from legal. If a directive creates a risk that touches a client, SLA, operations is required to flag it to legal and finance, and those flags cannot be blocked. And if someone says, "I'll call them," you still keep the record straight. I didn't get a confetti promotion. I got a title bump and a small raise that showed up on the next review. That was fine. What I wanted was the authority to say no when no was the right answer. I got that too. People also started copying me on the kinds of emails where, before, I'd only hear after the fact when a fire started. I also learned to write emails even cleaner than I already did. I have a template now. If someone asks for a thing that feels risky, I write, "Per your directive, we will do X. Here are the relevant clauses in Vendor Y's agreement and Client Z's SLA. Here is the predicted outcome if we do X. Please confirm that you accept the listed risk." I don't use fancy words. I use bullet points, invoice numbers, and dates without the year because they don't want years in stories like this. I keep it tight enough that a person glancing on a phone can catch the idea. People hate reading, but they hate paying penalties more. The part that will probably make some folks roll their eyes is that my boss actually tried to reach out to me after he left. He sent a short message through a mutual contact saying there were no hard feelings and that we both did our jobs. I did not reply because there wasn't much to say. He gave an order. I obeyed it. He owned it. That's work. If you're reading this because you're in a job where someone above you thinks rules are suggestions and contracts are vibes, here's the advice part. Keep records. Don't argue in a hallway where no one can see what was said. Ask for instructions in writing. If they won't write it yourself and ask them to confirm. Make your warning specific and boring. Here's the clause. Here's the number. Here's what will happen if we do this. Don't write novels. Write receipts. Then, if they still say, "Do the thing," you do the thing exactly as told. Don't tweak it. Don't hero it. Don't hide it. When the fallout happens, and it will if the plan was dumb, the story will tell itself. You won't have to decorate it. The funniest small detail from the whole mess was a spreadsheet. I keep a tab for lost discounts because it bugs me to pay extra for no reason. In a normal quarter, that cell shows a small number because we grab almost all of them. In the quarter of the hold, the cell turned red and decided to be a big number. It was like the file was embarrassed for us. When I closed the quarter, I put a note next to that cell that said, "Don't do this again." It was for me, but also not for me. A while after, I went to the vendor's site for a review meeting. I brought donuts because their warehouse team had hustled to clear our pallets once we cured the hold. We sat in a room that smelled like cardboard and coffee and talked about forecasts and buffers and what we could each do to make stop ship a thing we never said again. Their account manager looked tired in the way people look when they've been up at dawn chasing trucks. She thanked me again for the recovery and said, "If every client escalated with this much documentation, my life would be easier." That was nice to hear. Paperwork is boring until it's the rope you use to pull the truck out of the ditch. At my own company, the COO started a habit of asking operations to do a pre-mortem on anything that would change cash timing or vendor relationships. That means we sit in a room and say, If this goes wrong, what's the worst likely version of wrong? We write down the steps we'd take then, and we grade how likely it is. Some people hate it. They think it's negative. I like it because it makes you deal with reality in advance. You can still take a risk, but you're honest about it. The sales folks adapted too. A new head of sales came in who had lived through other companies where operations saved his tail. He was loud and confident like the last guy, but in a different way. He would say, "Let's go big, and tell me what guardrails I'm not allowed to break." That's the right way to be loud in a business that ships things. People outside ops sometimes treat vendor relationships like they're props. They are not. They're people with their own bosses, cash flow, and contracts. If you treat them like a piggy bank you can shake whenever you want, they will eventually hold the piggy bank high and say no. They will do it politely at first because they want to keep your business, and then they will do it in legal letters because they want to protect their company. This is not personal. It's the boring shape of how two companies keep the lights on. And clients aren't props either. They have their own schedules and penalties that bite them if we miss ours. I once heard someone say, "The client will understand." Sometimes they do. Sometimes they also have a board meeting where they have to explain why a rollout failed. Those people do not love hearing about your cash optimization plan. One of my favorite quiet moments after everything was fixed involved the client's operations lead. We were on a call doing a post-incident review. We walked through the facts. We didn't dress it up. We told them what we changed. The operations lead said, "Thank you for not pretending the weather did this." That told me we'd kept a slice of respect. That matters more than a big speech. I guess I should talk about whether I would do the same again. Yes. If a boss gives an order that is this clear and this wrong, and you've put your warnings in writing, malicious compliance is the safest path that leaves the truth intact. The key is to be transparent while you do it. Some people confuse malicious compliance with sabotage. It's not. Sabotage would be quietly making things worse so you can be right. Malicious compliance is refusing to secretly make things better when the person in charge wants to be wrong loudly. We have a running joke in operations now. When someone proposes a bold cash move without a plan, someone else says, "Do you want another poster for the wall?" After the incident, finance made a poster of that slide with a 1.8 million total. They blurred some bits so it wasn't giving away the farm, but the number is there. It hangs where people can see it. It's not there to dunk on anyone. It's there so when a new person arrives and starts to talk about making it look good, someone can point and say, "That was us trying to make it look good without doing the work." If you're wondering what happened to the relationship with the vendor, it actually improved. We added a small buffer stock at their site that we fund one invoice ahead. That's not cheap, but it's cheaper than penalties and expediting. We also added an automatic safety email that triggers when payment terms drift near the stop ship threshold. It goes to me, finance, and a shared vendor mailbox. If the message fires, I walk to finance and sit in a chair until the run is fixed. It's not a big process. It's a chair and a face. The client relationship also recovered. We ate part of the penalty and added service credits on top. We gave them a timeline with actual dates and hit them. When we finished the last install, their team clapped in the closet. That sounds cheesy, but it wasn't a big clap. It was a small, "Thanks for finally doing the thing you said you'd do." I can work with that all day. There was one more tiny thing. On my way out of the building one evening, I saw the general counsel by the elevator. He said, "Thank you for keeping your emails so clean. That's not a compliment you frame, but it's the kind you remember because it says you did the quiet parts right." So that's how I obeyed an entitled order, did nothing clever, and watched a company burn 1.8 million because someone thought contracts bend to personality. If you've been waiting for a twist where I sneakily paid a penny or called a secret meeting, sorry. The twist is boring. I wrote it down, I followed the line, and when the line curved into the wall, we all saw who drew it. The good person wins in this story only in the way good people often win at work. I kept my job. I got a little raise. I got a bit more authority to say no when no is the right answer. The bad person lost because the mirror finally got held up. That's enough. I'll take that over a speech. And next time someone says, "Make it look good," I'll do what I did then. I'll point at the poster with a big number and say, "We make it be good or we don't do it." And then I'll send an email that starts, "Per your directive," and attach the clause. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you again tomorrow.